Yo, it's me again, and I'm back with a handful of things to say on Deadlock, Valve's hippest and newest third-person shooter slash MOBA. This game has had me entranced for the past couple of months, and I feel I've finally developed enough of a perspective on it to share my thoughts. Deadlock is a 6v6 hero shooter structured similarly to games in the MOBA genre, such as League of Legends, Dota 2, and, you guessed it, Battleborn. The MOBA is one of my favorite genres of video game because I find that there are few feelings better than successfully working together with a handful of teammates in a competitive atmosphere. Every hero in the game has at least 4 abilities with varying uses, ranging from movement, damage, or even disabling the opponent. With that said, one of my main heroes is Dynamo, whom I believe is the perfect character to highlight some of what I think are this game's best points. Much like every other MOBA, the standard game mode of Deadlock has a laning phase that is less focused on aggression against your opponents and more focused on farming resources from both the minions spawned by the opposing side and neutral creeps that can be found in preset locations on the map. With these resources, you can purchase items and increase the level of your abilities to enhance your character's kit. Itemization plays a huge role in how effective your hero will be throughout the match. Where I feel Deadlock truly shines is in its build variety. There are currently 3 different damage types in total. Weapon damage, which is the damage dealt by each character's individual weapon. Melee damage, which is determined by a percentage of your weapon damage added to a character's specific value that increases as you gain boons from the patrons. And spirit damage, which is the form dealt by the majority of each character's abilities. The shop, or as it's called in the game, the Curiosity Shop, contains a plethora of items for increasing your weapon damage, survivability, spirit damage, and overall utility. While it is in the nature of hero shooters to have some characters be better at certain game plans than others, Deadlock is slightly better about this because it feels as though I could run almost any set of items on any character as long as I have a specific goal in mind. More often than not, my aim is booty cheeks, so on Dynamo I tend to focus on items that will reduce my cooldowns and extend the time that I can keep my opponents under control. But if I wanted to, I could build toward weapon damage instead and likely still be effective. The structure of the game allows for almost any playstyle to be viable, as long as the player has a baseline understanding of what they're doing. However, this game is not without its quirks. Given that Deadlock is still in its alpha phase, there are a handful of bugs that can occasionally decide the course of how an interaction with the enemy team can unfold. But because these are likely to be ironed out in due time, I'm going to avoid talking about them unless it's absolutely relevant. Instead, I'm going to mention some of the features that irk me and hope that you don't interpret this as a hate video outlining all of the negative things about this game, because believe you me, the positives far outweigh the negatives. The main objective of any MOBA is to push down the final structure at the center of the opposing base. Everything before this is just a means to an end. This can be most easily seen in the behavior of the creeps that will mindlessly hurl themselves into danger without a care in the world for how horribly it will end for the majority of them. Both sides will spawn the same number of creeps at the same intervals to maintain a certain equilibrium. The main thing that will offset this is intervention from the players. A large portion of knowing how to control the pace of a match is understanding when and where both teams' creeps are going to be. Which brings me to my first issue: creeps might be doing a little too much on their own. On the second most recent patch from the beginning of the match, creeps would spawn every 30 seconds, and then after the 20-minute mark, would start spawning every 25 seconds. When creeps spawn, they'll be attached to a railing that will quickly carry them to the front line. Because of this, a large number of creeps can build up in a lane in a short period of time. Once the laning phase is ended, the focus is supposed to shift toward a direct power struggle manifesting in team fights between the majority of players within the match. However, because of the damage that can be dealt by these creeps if left unchecked, more often than not you're going to need at least 2 people making sure that lanes are under control. There are games that I've been a part of that have gone on for maybe 45 minutes to an hour, where I spent almost the entire time bouncing back and forth between the outer lanes because if I hadn't, then we would have lost 20 minutes prior. With the most recent patch, creeps now start spawning faster at the 35-minute mark, but instead it's every 20 seconds. This has made it so that a split pushing strategy is more manageable in the early to mid game, but I'm still not a fan of how the pace of a match can ramp up significantly in a way that heavily encourages teams to break apart after they've gotten their power spikes, especially when it seems to be the most effective strategy once it begins. On top of this, objectives fall extremely quickly and are tied to critical advancements in either team's power scaling. The Tier 1 Guardian can usually be destroyed within the first 10 minutes of a game. While that's a reasonable amount of time for a Tier 1 objective to be taken, the part that might be a bit rough is that the side that lost said Guardian now also loses their lane shop. This means that in order to continue buying items to stay toe-to-toe with your enemies, you'll need to either go back to base, put yourself at risk by going to a neutral curiosity shop, or the one that I've been personally subject to many a time, die. Needless to say, keeping up with your opponent becomes noticeably more difficult. Dota gets around this by giving each player a courier that can be commanded to deliver items from the base, and League lets you recall at any given moment to quickly return to base, buy your items, and get back in lane. I'm not sure how Deadlock would go about solving this issue without introducing one of the two methods aforementioned, or if it's even viewed as a problem in the first place, because I might be either missing information on movement that would make it easier to buy items and not miss out on farm, or this could be just part of the game's design philosophy. Regardless, I found myself being stuck between a rock and a hard place with wanting to go to a shop to purchase an item that I know will be crucial for the next fight, and sticking around to make sure I'm in position for an impending fight a little more often than I'm comfortable with. The Tier 2 Walker. This is a weird one. I've had games so bad that we lost this thing in 15 minutes, and games so good that we held all of them for almost 30. I can't quite find the consistency in these, because sometimes it feels like they melt like ice on a Florida sidewalk, and other times it's as if I'm chipping away at a brick wall with a toothpick. Not understanding Walker health is whatever. I'll probably get a better grasp on how much damage I can actually deal to them with time. But something that really doesn't make sense to me is the reward for destroying one. Every player starts with 9 item slots. After an enemy walker is destroyed, your team will unlock another item slot for an eventual total of 12. This doesn't sit right with me, because in a game where itemization is your best friend, you're preventing a team that's already lost some of its map control with structures from leveling the playing field instead with individual character power. The side that's already gotten an advantage could hit a point of strength that the losing side couldn't possibly catch up to. And finally, we have the base structures, comprised of the Tier 3 Guardians, Shrines, and the Patron themselves. Destruction of the Tier 3 Guardians will give a permanent speed boost for your team's railing, and destruction of Shrines will give a damage boost to friendly creeps. Both of these are fine, because one just means that the winning side becomes a bit more mobile, and the other is meant to maintain pressure after taking down almost every other enemy-controlled structure. Nothing here affects how powerful you can become, or the locations in which you can gather the items to gain that power. When enemies are present, the Patron will fire a slow-moving laser that scorches the ground in its first phase, and a damaging pulse on up to 3 enemies during its second. Both of these attacks are so underwhelming that I barely noticed they were even happening while besieging the enemy base. The main threat when dealing with these structures is a heavily telegraphed explosion that will inflict curse if it makes contact, and that's only because it's disruptive enough to force you to hold back for a second. However, this attack happens too infrequently to actually deter a push. Despite all of this, organizing the final push can still be quite troublesome, and it's almost strictly because the entire enemy team needs to be in just about the same place. And for that reason, the Rejuvenator exists. In the center of the map, there is a boss-like neutral objective called the Mid-Boss. Upon the Mid-Boss's defeat, a big green crystal will appear. This crystal needs to be heavy punched 3 times. For every successful heavy punch, the team that punched it will gain a once-per-hero team-wide revive. If I'm being 100% honest, I think this mechanic is a little overtuned. Among the past maybe 20 to 30 games that I've played, I can count on one hand how many times the team that was able to find the opportunity to take the mid-boss has lost the preceding fight. Having 3 instances of all efforts toward taking down one of your enemies being completely nullified is a near insurmountable obstacle. Earlier I mentioned how structures fall extremely quickly. This, combined with one team becoming an unstoppable ball of death after picking up the Rejuvenator, means that more often than not, there's next to no hope of defending against the next attempt at a push. Before you know it, you're either getting the innards of your base completely pushed in, or one step closer to being choked out of resources, which is pretty big due to just how much you can get from the jungle. Wait, that just clicked for me. I was wondering for the longest time why it's still called the jungle, even though they're in a city, and I get it now. They're in New York, and New York is called the concrete jungle. God, dude, I'm so freaking slow. Anyway, the jungle in Deadlock is complicated to say the least, debatably to the game's detriment. It begins with your standard stuff. There are 3 different strengths of neutral camp, each scattered to various places on the map. When a neutral creep is killed, the souls will be stocked as unsecured, meaning they'll be dropped upon death, but those souls can still be spent alongside your secured souls as long as you meet the price on the next item you're going to buy. A neutral camp will only respawn after it's been completely cleared. and here's where the complications start. The times for camp respawn varies based on camp strength, but none of those times are on exact minutes, making it moderately difficult to keep track of. Personally, being a Dota player and all, I would prefer for all camps map-wide to respawn when the game clock reaches an exact minute. However, if this is also part of the game's design philosophy, then I'm fine with it staying this way. But I would really appreciate if there was some sort of visual to indicate when the camp will respawn that's only shown to the team that took the camp. Speaking of which, I noticed that you can see when a camp is taken by the opposing team because the icon on the minimap will disappear. I'm not a big fan of this, since I would be able to determine enemy locations without sight or sound with that information. This same logic applies to Sinner's Sacrifice, another form of neutral objective that unfortunately I have mixed feelings about. The Sinner's Sacrifice is a box of souls that must be melee attacked in order to acquire said soul. With every melee done onto these machines, the attacker is dealt back a flat amount of damage, regardless of the strength of the strike. The final melee, if done when all the lights at the top of the machine are lit, will grant Golden Idol buffs, the part that I'm not fond of. A Golden Idol buff is a permanent minor stat bonus that can be acquired from, you're not gonna believe this, Golden Idol statues. These are scattered around the map, generally along the way to, or in the same points of interest as, neutral objectives. I don't think this mechanic is fitting for a game like this, mostly because it's entirely related to random chance, not only for getting a buff in the first place, but also for what type of buff you get. I can't tell you how many games I've won or lost because of these buffs, but I can tell you that if the deciding factor for any of my games was related to someone getting luckier than another, then I'd be pretty pissed. It's already difficult enough to know when and where to farm, as well as what items to build to counter 6 whole opponents while still maintaining your hero's scaling. Adding in another layer that I have no way of checking to see how heavily it's affected a match might be too much. As you can see, there's a whole lot going on with Deadlock, and that's the main reason that I love it so much. Experimenting with different kinds of builds is a huge part of what I find fun with games like this, especially if and when they prove to be effective in their application to a real match. There are so many matches where I've seen people build some items that I never would have considered for the character that they're playing, but they still found a way to make it work for them. And here, you are king, and the only thing that can dethrone you is your own ability. Well, that and maybe a cursed relic.